On a quiet afternoon ride through the countryside, a young black girl seated near the front of a school-style public bus slowly raises her hand. Not to wave, not to stretch, but to signal something far more urgent. It's subtle, deliberate. Her fingers move in a pattern some might ignore, but the boy next to her doesn't. 11-year-old Liam, curious and observant, notices her wide eyes and trembling fingers. He doesn't fully understand, but his gut tells him something is wrong. Without drawing attention, he whispers to the bus driver, then pulls out his phone and dials 911, voice low and calm. Around them, passengers begin to glance over, unsure why a child is calling the police. The girl stays silent, her signal steady. What follows in the next few minutes unravels a truth no one on that bus expected, and turns an ordinary moment into a life-saving miracle. Before we begin, drop your city in the comments and follow us for stories where everyday heroes rewrite fate in a single moment. The midday sun spilled through the large windows of an aging public bus as it rolled down, a quiet rural highway. Inside, the passengers were a mix of professionals in suits, young students heading home, and tired commuters staring blankly out the glass or into their phones. Among them sat 10-year-old Zoe Carter, a young black girl with neatly braided hair, and a pale yellow t-shirt that seemed just a bit too clean for the road. She sat beside an older man who looked like he could be her uncle or guardian, but something about the way she curled into herself, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, said otherwise. Her eyes didn't meet his. In fact, she avoided eye contact altogether. Her body was stiff, her breath shallow, and though her face stayed calm, there was something haunted about the silence around her. Just behind her, in the adjacent row, sat Liam Sanders, 11 years old with a mop of sandy blonde hair, and an expression always 2 steps ahead of his age. He hadn't meant to watch her, he was just looking around like kids do on long rides, but something caught his attention. Zoe wasn't fidgeting like most kids. She wasn't looking out the window, daydreaming, or nodding off. She was still, too still. Then, slowly, almost like she was testing the air around her, she lifted her hand. Not fully, not high, just enough to form a shape. Thumb tucked into her palm, fingers closing over it. Liam blinked. He'd seen that gesture before. A TikTok video his older sister showed him popped into his mind. Something about a silent hand signal used by victims of abuse or danger. He watched her again. She repeated the motion, subtly but deliberately, as if she wasn't sure anyone was watching, but desperately hoped someone was. Liam's stomach tightened. That wasn't shyness. That wasn't boredom. That was a call for help, and no one else on the bus seemed to notice. The man beside her placed a hand on her backpack possessively, murmuring something in a low tone Liam couldn't hear. Zoe didn't flinch, but her eyes widened for a brief second. Liam knew then. This wasn't just a weird vibe. This was real, and he was the only one who saw it. Liam leaned forward slightly, just enough so his voice wouldn't carry beyond the space between them. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone low and careful. Zoe didn't answer. She didn't even turn her head. But her hand lifted again, slowly, deliberately, and she repeated the signal. This time it wasn't subtle. It was pleading. Liam's eyes darted to the man beside her, whose expression remained unreadable. But then the man glanced toward Liam and noticed his attention. Without a word, he adjusted in his seat and gripped Zoe's backpack tighter, pulling it closer to his leg. Zoe's body shifted ever so slightly, like she was shrinking away without actually moving. Liam's heart pounded. He stood and approached the front of the bus. "Excuse me," he said to the driver, pretending to glance at the approaching intersection. "Can I get off early? My house is a little before the next stop." The driver nodded but didn't slow down. Liam walked back, pulled out his phone, and, without breaking eye contact with the floor, quietly dialed 911. He put it on speaker, his volume barely above a whisper. "911, what's your emergency?" came the voice on the other end. Liam spoke quickly but softly. "I think there's a girl on my bus who's in trouble. She's doing a hand signal. I saw it online. She's not talking." The dispatcher's tone shifted immediately. "What's your location? Can you describe her?" Liam gave the details: bus number, route, cross streets. As he spoke, other passengers began noticing the tension. A woman in business attire across the aisle looked up from her tablet. Two teenagers behind Liam exchanged glances. The air shifted from casual disinterest to collective unease. People weren't sure what was happening, but they could feel it. Something was wrong. The dispatcher stayed on the line, calming Liam and asking for continued updates. The bus driver received a call over the radio. An officer was en route. No one told the man beside Zoe what was going on. No one dared. But he began to grow restless, glancing around, adjusting in his seat, whispering to Zoe in a voice too low to catch. She stared out the window, lips pressed tightly together, her small fingers still trembling slightly in her lap. Then flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror. The bus driver slowed, pulling to the shoulder as instructed. A hush fell over the passengers as red and blue beams lit up the inside of the bus. Tires crunched against gravel. Doors hissed open, and everyone held their breath. Two uniformed officers stepped onto the bus, their presence instantly shifting the air from tense to electric. The doors shut behind them with a hiss, sealing the moment like a courtroom ready for testimony. One officer, tall and composed, scanned the faces of the passengers before his eyes landed on the man seated beside Zoe. The man's face twisted into a mask of confusion and offense. "What's this about?" he barked. "We're just riding. The bus. What's the problem here?" His voice was loud, designed to claim innocence through volume. But the silence of the passengers drowned him out. No one bought it. Zoe tried to stay still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, but the tears had started. Silent, streaming. Her small shoulders shook as she stared at her knees. The officer nearest her knelt slightly to her level, voice gentle. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Zoe." It was barely audible, but enough. The second officer turned to the man. "Sir, can you tell us your relationship to this girl?" The man puffed up. "She's my neighbor's kid. I'm taking her to her aunt's, all right? Her folks asked me to help out. What's with the drama?" Before either officer could respond, a woman a few rows back lifted Liam's phone. "You might want to see this," she said, showing the open video of the now viral silent hand signal. The officers looked back and forth between the video and Zoe, who had only minutes before mimicked the exact motion, thumb tucked, fingers folded. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, intentional. The officer beside Zoe didn't rush. He let a moment pass, giving her space. "Zoe," he asked softly, "do you feel safe with this man?" The question hung heavy in the stillness. Even the low hum of the bus engine seemed to quiet in that instant. Zoe's hands twitched slightly. She lifted her eyes, wet and wide, and then, slowly, solemnly, shook her head, no. Everything moved quickly after that. The officers stood, firm now, and instructed the man to exit the bus. He started to protest, his voice rising again, but they cut him off. "Sir, we'll talk outside." He was escorted down the aisle, sputtering excuses that no one believed anymore. Once off the bus, the officers remained on either side of him as the door hissed closed behind them. Inside, Zoe sat frozen, still breathing in shallow bursts. Then another officer, a woman who had arrived in the second patrol car, climbed aboard and knelt next to Zoe with a soft smile. "Hi there," she said gently. "You did the right thing. Can I sit with you for a second?" Zoe nodded. The officer didn't touch her, didn't rush her, just sat. Then, slowly, she offered her hand. Zoe looked at it, and for the first time since boarding the bus, she exhaled. Moments later, Zoe was quietly walked off the bus, her small frame flanked protectively by the two officers. Liam watched from his seat, heart still pounding, eyes wide. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt relieved. The girl, with the raised hand, she was safe now. At the station, the truth unraveled quickly, thread by thread, fact by chilling fact. The man who had claimed to be Zoe's family friend wasn't even on the emergency contact list. Officers dug into his record and uncovered a disturbing pattern. Prior reports of suspicious behavior around children in his neighborhood, though none had stuck, until now. Zoe had been reported missing by her school 3 days earlier, but no one could reach her legal guardian. Her aunt, who worked 2 jobs, had been desperately calling every hospital, every friend, every corner she could think of. And all along, Zoe had been riding buses and staying in motels with a man who had no right to be near her. It was the hand signal that cracked everything open. That simple motion, learned from a cousin, remembered in fear, became the moment everything changed. "If she hadn't done it," one officer said quietly, "and if that boy hadn't recognized it—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They all knew. Meanwhile, Liam sat on a bench in the lobby, legs swinging just above the ground, his phone clutched loosely in his hand. His mother rushed in, confused and breathless, after receiving a call from the dispatcher. She expected a prank, or maybe a misunderstanding. But when an officer gently explained what Liam had done, how his instinct may have saved Zoe from something unthinkable, her eyes filled instantly. She dropped to her knees and wrapped him in a hug so tight it nearly stole his breath. "You did the right thing," she whispered through tears. "I'm so proud of you." And then came Zoe's aunt. She burst through the station doors with the urgency of 1,000 sleepless nights, eyes wide until they landed on Zoe. The girl ran into her arms, sobbing openly now, her small body trembling in relief. The aunt clutched her niece, rocking, her back and forth whispering apologies and thank yous and prayers all at once. The room fell into a hush, not because anyone asked, but because some moments demand reverence. That day, a child's quiet gesture, and another child's decision to act, had stopped something terrible before it went too far. And now, against the odds, Zoe was safe. In the weeks that followed, Zoe Carter's life slowly began to rebuild. Safely back home with her aunt, she started school again, this time with a counselor by her side and a circle of care around her. She smiled more, slept better, laughed a little louder each day. Her aunt kept her close, never letting go of her hand when they walked down the street, as if afraid that even now the world might forget to look out for girls like Zoe. But something had changed, not just for Zoe, but for the entire town. At a local community center, 2 weeks after the incident, families gathered for a public safety event hosted by the police department. Booths were set up with information on missing children, resources for families, and one small table decorated with laminated cards that showed a simple, powerful gesture. Thumb tucked into palm, fingers wrapped over, the silent hand signal. In bold letters, the banner above read, "Hands speak, one signal, one life, one chance." Towards the back of the room, Zoe spotted him, Liam, dressed in his favorite hoodie, nervously tugging at his sleeves. Their eyes met. No words were needed. She walked up to him and hugged him tightly, the kind of hug only two kids who'd shared a terrifying secret could understand. He didn't say anything either. He just hugged her back and smiled. Later that afternoon, a detective took the stage and spoke to the crowd, parents, teachers, kids, about the importance of paying attention to what isn't said. "We teach our kids to speak up," he said, "but we also have to teach them how to be heard, even in silence." He held up a small placard with the hand signal on it and added, "And we must teach others to listen." Liam's name was called next. He stepped forward a bit awkwardly and was handed a certificate of recognition, not for bravery, not for heroism, but for humanity. The crowd applauded, but Liam just glanced at Zoe in the front row and shrugged with a quiet grin. That was enough. Hands Speak became more than a campaign. It became a curriculum in the local schools, a message woven into hallway posters, morning announcements, and parent newsletters. Teachers were trained to recognize silent cues, and every classroom made space for discussion about safety, trust, and instinct. Zoe, in time, told her story in a letter shared at her school assembly, not to relive what happened, but to show what could be prevented when someone pays attention. In that letter, she wrote, "I didn't yell, I didn't scream, but I asked for help, and someone heard me. That made all the difference." And so, in a world often overwhelmed by noise, it was a simple hand signal, a glance, a gesture, a pause, that reminded an entire community what it means to truly see each other. Because sometimes, the smallest action can change everything. She didn't yell, she didn't scream, but her hand spoke louder than words, and one boy chose to listen. In a world filled with noise, distractions, and assumptions, it took a quiet moment, a subtle signal, and a child's instinct to change everything. Liam didn't wear a badge or a cape. He simply paid attention when it mattered most. And because of that, Zoe was saved. It makes you wonder, how many silent cries go unnoticed every day? How often do we walk past someone who's silently asking for help without ever realizing it? Would we have seen what Liam saw? Would we have listened? If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of the quiet power of awareness, of the strength in choosing to care. And don't forget to follow us for more true stories that prove courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper, a glance, a hand raised in hope. See you in the next one, where heroes are watching, even in silence.